Greetings,
Sure,
greetings,
happy to
greetings.
do that.
My name is Elton Brewington, and I'm with Discover Brightside. And I have the great pleasure of having one of our distinguished authors on our platform today, Dr. David Schein. And he is a great author, and he's got written a commendable book, Bad Deal for America. And as I was previously talking with him, it's discovered that we have some interesting parallels. And so I'm delighted to share these moments with him, and I'll have him briefly introduce himself, and then we'll talk a little bit about political persona and the dynamics of our times, and also his book, of course. And so, introducing Dr. Schein. Tell us, Dr. Schein, share with us the Bad Deal for America.
Sure, happy to do that. I am a professor at the University of St. Thomas here in Houston. It's kind of a mid-sized university, obviously Catholic university, and I'm in my 14th year there, and I teach ethics related business law related courses. And I've had a very, very long time interest in politics going back to high school. I came from a military family. I think sometimes that helps to get that started at an early age. And I've lived through quite a bit. I've lived through the Vietnam War, which was a very difficult time in America, very divisive time. And I've seen quite a bit. Of course, probably one of the most pivotal events in my life was 9/11. And I was in Washington, D.C. on 9/11 and sadly watched the smoke rise from the Pentagon uh, for about 5 miles high, plume from the Pentagon. And I got to watch that for 4 hours in person because I was sitting on the Washington Beltway, which was at a literal inch by inch crawl. And normally my drive home would have taken 40 minutes, and it took 4 hours that day. But subsequent to that, I got involved in writing. I wrote my first book, Decline of America, which is a study of the political management of the presidency, and then followed it with, as you mentioned so kindly, my second book, Bad Deal for America. Both books are available on Amazon. Bad Deal for America was actually published through Amazon, and it's a study of how we've elected some very strange people to Congress, and I think that's part of the problem. Is I'm looking for people who are common sense, talk to me type of people. So those are not the ones featured in the book. And to give you an idea how bad it is, we found one congressman from California who's now deceased, but in any event, he we found quotes from him that were so abusive that we decided not to put them in the book for fear that it might get the book or part of the book censored. That's how bad the comments were.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, and this was in your research for what would have been 2000 sometime that way. I
Well,
mean,
we were doing we did the research. We started on it. It takes one of the things I think people miss sometimes is the book's only, a couple hundred pages, 220 pages, and they don't realize is that even with I am fortunate as a professor. I have students who work with me as part of my research teams. That turns over, of course, as they graduate and move on to better paying jobs. I have to
uh,
get new student researchers, but I've been very fortunate. And but a whole team of us worked for 2 years to put the book together. And like I said, every single quote had to be double checked to each politician to make sure that we were being fair to them, even though we were picking things out on purpose because they were silly or funny.
uh-huh.
But like I said, we did have to self-edit a little bit. And But the audiobook was really fun because I actually brought in professional actors to be the parts of the different politicians.
Okay.
And so that was a lot of fun.
Wow. Now, so just so that we can stay on point, there you just raised an initiative with me, that I would like to hear from you about regarding where we are. One, now, and you are, I'm just checking you out here. Let's talk about Supreme Court.
Sure.
I mean,
I track the Supreme Court very closely because I produce a webcast called Business Law 101, and we've done about 500 episodes
okay.
since the year 2020. It airs 5 days a week on the Apple Brushwood Media Network, and it's only a 2.5 to 3 minute piece.
Uh,
But we generally cover, appellate court decisions, big decisions that the public is interested in, like the Sean Diddy Combs conviction.
wow,
We covered that. But one of the things that has been a great gift to us is the Supreme Court only usually issues a handful of rulings each year.
uh,
And my goodness, they've been at it this year. So
they've
they've
gotten
issued
there. They worked hard this year. These last few years, actually, they probably worked harder in the last few years than they have worked historically over the last 20, over the last 20.
You are right on point, and as someone who's been an attorney for 48 years, I used to joke that I must have graduated from law school at 12, but even saying that doesn't work anymore when you've been an attorney almost 50 years. But
Uh-huh.
I've followed the Supreme Court, and you're absolutely right. It is an unbelievable number of decisions, and not just decisions, but really pivotal decisions that have an impact on a lot of different people. These are not just, oh, this is some weird legal thing out there that'll never affect it. We're talking about things that affect huge numbers of people.
That's true. That's true. I mean, and you make a great point in that the concentration of people that are being affected or impacted by Supreme Court decisions, uh, they are more relative to interior Americans. The regular Americans are probably the most impacted. It's not the extreme case Americans, the rich or the people who are exterior to modern politics.
Absolutely. And it does make a difference. The ones that have gotten the most headlines are the ones that came out on Thursday, June 25th. One of them is the people refer to as the Roundup decision, which was a technical ruling. It isn't about whether people get sick from using Roundup. It's whether the government should have included a required Bayer Chemicals, which bought out Monsanto, which is the original developer of Roundup, to give a notice that glyphosate could cause cancer. And the ruling is based on the fact that there is no consistent medical evidence that glyphosate salt does cause cancer, and therefore the court ruled that you do not have to have that ruling on the bottle. What's interesting about the case, as someone who actually uses weed killer of all things,
Uh-huh.
um, is that the Roundup brand product no longer includes glyphosate in it.
Huh.
They've changed the chemical makeup of the company of the product Roundup.
They made the change for the recipe, but they didn't give a public notice about it, sounds like.
Right.
Wow. How about that? Now that makes you that sounds really suspect. Sounds really suspect. So let's just in terms of now this is a rule. This is a ruling that just came up. You said June 26th. Oh no, June 25th. That was 3 days ago. Oh yeah, I heard that, but I was listening to the report, but I didn't I didn't clue in on some of the details relative to that. Wow, how about that? So
I've
that
actually read the decision. Yes.
Right. So that leads me to suggest or consider that and now because of the 40 no is it 40? Yeah, 45. 45 that was because of 45's consideration for new Supreme Court justices. He will go down in history, go up or go down in history as having some of the most significant positions relative to Supreme Court and public policy, I would think, So how are we supposed to handle that? What is the course of action? And that's another tick. I should probably keep a tick mark for all of the impacts of a bad deal for America that we're looking at, And this is a platform. This is great, Dr. Sham. I'm getting excited about our dialogue here. This is so amazing, So what is your uh, any other decisions that you can mention or identify?
Yes. The two that they came out with this week that are very significant are two rulings regarding immigration. One of them is something that I think for a lot of Americans makes a lot of sense. And there's a program that's been around for decades called TPS, and that's temporary protected status. And that's something where it was particular for a couple of countries like Syria, where there was a lot of civil war and people were really being impacted and poor innocent people were being killed. And then in Haiti, Haiti has just had a series of horrible things happening there. The country is a mess all the time. And so we said, well, we're going to give temporary protected status to people from Syria and from Haiti, but we have, and the statistics are rather stunning. We're talking about 250,000 Haitians here on a temporary basis. And as many reasonable people point out, that's not temporary anymore. We have to either, have them go through a normal citizenship review process, or we have to send them back. It doesn't make sense to use TPS in this unusual fashion. So the court ruling simply said that the president can say, you know what? After 20 years, it's time for people to either go home or go through the normal citizenship process. So
Or,
that's the essence of that ruling.
or create a more provisional allowance for Haitians
Yes,
because they have taken
absolutely.
depleted because the country has been depleted over time because of the earthquake and that kind of thing. So a more proactive status would have been to say, okay, I don't know, make it the 51st state or something. I mean, but I don't know. I've never been to Haiti. Have you?
I have been to the flip side of the island. We had a
Dominican Republic.
family reunion in the Dominican Republic, and what's a very strange thing is to see a small island that's divided into two distinct sovereign countries, and for the Dominican Republic to have these beautiful resorts and nice places to visit and seems to have a fairly stable country. And then the other end of the island is Haiti, that
Yeah.
seems to be relatively close to that famous Greek term Hades, as in hell. I
I
mean,
remember the hell.
it's very strange. It's not because of geography, because they're in the same place,
That's
but
amazing.
yeah. But the
You're right.
Dominican Republic maintains a very stiff wall between the two countries. They're protecting their uh, premises. I can tell you that.
No, I've been to Dominican Republic once, and I was, it's kind of like Singapore and Malaysia. The same provinces, but they're teetered off
Mhm.
by a borderline. But well, I wanted to go to Haiti, but I didn't get through there for that. But that's quite interesting. That's amazing. That's amazing to even to consider. This is, I mean, and if there were now, how would you do that? Because they're two different countries, so you couldn't offer. Well, if you offered Dominican Republic a provisional access, then you, by consequence, would have to include Haiti. But I don't know. I don't know how that would work. I don't know constitutional law like that. But you might have some input. But wow.
Well, yeah, not on that one necessarily. The other ruling on immigration was a little bit more confusing, I think, for the general public, and that was is that uh, they when there was a big rush at the border, they put in something, the Immigration Service put in something called metering at the border. So basically, we're talking about the border between the Mexico and the United States, and a couple key points there where a lot of pedestrians come through that southern border. And the Immigration Service said, we can stop you. If you do not come into the United States, we do not have to accept your amnesty request, which I think is a very strange deal overall. I'm not really sure how all that works, but in any event, uh, the a particular nonprofit group went to court and said that the Immigration Service couldn't refuse to, I guess, process amnesty applications from Mexico. And the Supreme Court looked at the law that was involved and said, it's a technical ruling, and that's sometimes things that frustrate people about the law is it's a literal reading of the law, and people may feel it should have come out differently, but it is what it is. But the court said that the law says that you have to be in the United States to request amnesty. And since you're not in the United States, you cannot request amnesty and you cannot force yourself in order to request amnesty, and basically upheld the metering. Now, what's interesting is metering is not taking place anymore because the current administration has been very successful at stopping this push through the southern border so that it's not metered at the present time. So the ruling was triggered by something that's not really happening today.
I think I remember hearing about that, that you'd have to
Yes,
actually on land, on land,
yes.
and receive that kind of access for your immigration. Wow, those are very three important distinctions. Okay, so now I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Just if there's anything else that's outstanding, according to the Supreme Court, that you think might be uh, measurable or accountable for.
Well, we're waiting on some new ones. I think his firing the woman from the Fed is still floating around. Birthright citizenship is
Okay,
still floating around. And
okay.
another very controversial case is this issue of whether states can ban trans men from women's sports.
Oh yeah.
And there's a video that I just watched literally before we began speaking today with Samuel Alito interviewing one of the attorneys or asking one of the attorneys questions,
Uh-huh.
and it was pretty interesting. So I don't know how the court's going to rule on that, but I'm ju guessing that Justice Alito is probably going to rule that you can exclude biological men from women's sports,
That,
and
that creates
it's
that
we'll
creates
see.
that creates a whole new room. I mean, the competition, and then how? Because I mean, I suspect that the Olympics are probably waiting for that ruling to take a position on those matters, because that is
Sure.
opening up that whole dilemma. So, wow, phenomenal. So you're right on point. I'm really excited about that. That's interesting, Dr. Shine. So just to move around then in terms of your book, I when to talk a little bit about your book in terms of that. Is that those are some of the things that you've outlined or distinguished that way?
Yes. Well, one of the things is that Congress has disconnected its compensation from the taxpayers. They can now vote themselves raises,
Oh,
and without any consultation with the taxpayers. And so they now, a lot of them run around. And by the way, because I didn't run for Congress. I ran for state office twice in the 1990s. But it got me to a position where I actually I had free run of the Rayburn office building in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years.
I know that.
And I lived in D.C. and I got to hang out with some people pretty high up in the government at the congressional level. And I didn't have any official position, but it was kind of interesting. You know the old cliche, boy, if I could be a fly on the wall. I had that opportunity. I was actually the fly on the wall, and that is what kind of inspired both of my books so far is having this real close-up look. I've been out to parties with lobbyists to watch them do what they do. I actually was recruited by one of the big industrial lobbying organizations up there at one point. So it's been real interesting to have that firsthand look. But one of the things is a lot of members of Congress will say, well, I'm really broke. I really need to be paid a whole lot more money because I need to have a house in DC or Virginia, Northern Virginia, and then I need to have a house in my district and all this stuff. And my position is very different than that. And that was what kind of drove the book is, look, these people have a lot of money. I mean, the annual salary is about 180,000 just right off the bat, and that's three times the average income in the United States is about 62,000. And so it's three times the average income. Secondly, what they should be doing is to have a dormitory in DC. And when you need to be in DC, which you don't need to be there much, in my opinion, then you can go out and stay in a dormitory, not a hotel, a dormitory. We'll build a couple college type dormitories, and you guys can go up there and hang out, and gals. But I want you to live in your district. I want you to take care of your people. And of course, you're in a beautiful place in Raleigh, North Carolina, in that area. Like I said, I've been there. It's a great area. And be there, talk to the people, deal with them on a day-to-day basis. And then, you vote in DC, but then you're going to know what your people want. And I think that, DC has a very corrupting influence on our politicians. And I think that's part of what we're trying to illustrate with Bad Deal for America. But it's interesting because I think that with the digital advances that we've made in the last 5 years is we don't need these people in DC. They can have, electronic, like we're talking today, we're talking like we were in the same room in Raleigh, North Carolina or Houston, Texas, right? I mean, we have great connection, we have great communication. I know that it's definitely you, it's definitely me. What else do we need to have a discussion? So I think that it would help to reduce the power of the lobbyists in Washington and to reduce the power of the big money, but in flip side, give the people more impact by making the members of Congress interact more with their neighbors and the people that put them in office. So that's my thought and that's kind of what I had behind the book. The number one pitch of the book, Bad Deal for America, is term limits, which would increase the opportunity for someone like you to get elected because it is extremely difficult to overcome incumbency. Although
Yeah.
I will say that it seems like incumbency is fading in America. And a vivid example is three incumbent Republican senators, well, two Republican senators, one Republican congressman, have all lost their primary elections because they were crosswise with President Trump. And so, in there was a personal friend of mine who was in Congress here in Houston, and he was running for his 18th, for his ninth term, it would be year 18. And I was going to say to him, "Look, John, I'm willing to support you,
Sure.
but I'm a big fan of term limits. I think it's time for you to not run next time."
Uh,
And son of a gun, he lost the primary. He lost the election. Didn't lose the primary. He lost the election. And so
Trying to say
I
it's
kind of
because
got my wish there.
because you badmouthed him.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I didn't badmouth the guy. He's a great guy. But you can also look, a lot of these people that go to Congress that are there for a long time,
Yeah.
stop having a house in their district or shrink down to an apartment or a hotel room that they claim is their house in the district. And they really are Washington, D.C. insiders. And in fact, many of them stay in D.C. and become lobbyists and whatever else they do up there in D.C. And so I'd like to see that reversed, and let's have people cycle out. And I think it's nice to have fresh blood. I don't think, and that's a bipartisan comment. I don't think we need Chuck Grassley or Chuck Schumer in Washington today. I don't think we need either one of them. One on the Republican side, one on the Democrat side. Both, they've been there too long. They're not connected to the. There's no way they're connected to the people anymore.
Right. Because every 5 to 7 years, Washington changes. The political
Yes,
and the platforms, presidents change, and what they're after, and the appetites, and what the American people want. And it's an amazing.
absolutely.
You make the point, and this is something that I'll close in on for us. You identify the point, fly on the wall. Now, I mean, there must be scenarios, and I can name one at the outset. I'd love to have been the fly on the wall of these discussions between people, and I'll identify it for you here. My fly on the wall consideration was I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when President Lyndon Baines Johnson called in Governor Wallace because Governor Wallace was attacking the civil rights workers, and when he left, he was protecting them. I would love to know what they talked about and what President Johnson told Wallace. Yeah, I just been a fly on the wall to hear that conversation. So I mean, and in Washington, wow, you must have hundreds of those. And I mean, I'd like to hear some of them if you have.
Well, you named a good one. George Wallace unequivocally changed his position
Mhm.
on segregation, and did it fairly abruptly. Of course, Lester Maddox, who, same time period, I don't think he had the same epiphany. Yeah, you're two different politicians, and a little bit different direction there. But we've definitely seen some tremendous things. For me, I experienced that. I'm old enough that even though the Little Rock decision was in the mid 1950s, I was going to high school. I started high school in Norfolk, Virginia in 1966. And we were still desegregating the schools in Norfolk, Virginia at that time. And so it was very interesting for me. I was one of the first integrated high school debate teams. I know, be no surprise to you, a talker like me, I was on the high school debate team, but we had the first mixed race high school debate team. We
Mhm.
went to your neighborhood for a high school tournament in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Okay, okay. I know.
And we went to I, I, I believe it was actually called the Robert E. Lee Hotel at that time. And
Uh-huh.
we go in there with our mixed race debate team, high school debate team. And there was actually, I'm aware enough, I'm fairly tall, I was aware enough, they were having a big debate behind the counter at the hotel as to what to do with us.
Wow.
Because, I mean, and this is 1967 or 68. This was not 1958. And but it was kind of interesting. Of course, fortunately, they made the right decision and let us all into the hotel rooms there. But it could have really been something if they said, "Oh well, we won't let the black students in. We'll let the white students." What I'm saying. There was things that might have happened that day, but they had to think about it. The fact that they had to think about it, to me, was a sign that things hadn't really caught up as much with the law as we'd like to think. But I lived through that period, so I'm very glad to see that we've made so much progress since then.
Dr. Schein, I mean, you're a fascinating personality. And do you do? We're excited if you'll consider, participating in our podcast and being a part to help you with your books. And we'd like to engage with you and some other activities or events that we think might add great value to the sale of your book and awareness. Now, I'm not even going but you've got this mental acuity that I'm fascinated by. Quite frankly, and I hear who you are and I hear your experiences and I also understand what you bring to a volume at a time like this. At a time like this. And so, in fact, I'd love to help you facilitate. Have you done any TV or any programming have value out there?
I have done a little bit. I was interviewed, in fact, when my first book was released, I did a show here on a local show on public television here in Houston, and was invited to participate in a political discussion with about the book. And I haven't done much TV. I do, pretty active webcasting. I have a show that runs on Saturdays right now called Saving America, where we talk about politics and we interview people who are involved, not in politics, but in advancing America. So we talk with people who are industrial leaders or business leaders and things like that. And usually, and we program fairly short interviews. We've had a panel recently, two educators talking about the need to return to civics education in K through 12. And I think that's very important. And I know that's the way I grew up, and assume that's the way you grew up. I mean, we had civics was what it was called in my uh, high school freshman class, and I took U.S. history and and stuff like that. And I think it's important that all Americans have a good exposure to the history of the country, good and bad, not doesn't need to be sanitized, but I think that that's important. So this is some of the issues that we've covered. And like I said, I also do business law 101 on a daily basis. And the way I'm able to do it, because I'm booked so heavily with my teaching schedule, is we get to pre-record some stuff. So that helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, so, Doctor, I won't hold you any longer, but I really, really thank you for participating in today's interview and discussions, and I'm appreciative. And I recognize your brilliance and capacity, and I'm so thankful and thankful for you participating, for being a part of it, and thank you for your true America on this 250th anniversary. Yeah, it's America's
Yes.
make this country great, and your work is astoundingly beneficial. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Hold
for talking with us.
on one second. Hold on one second. I'll just conclude. Okay. Okay. Very good.